My name is Phil Dalton. I'm the director of the Center for Civic Engagement here at Hofstra University. This, I understand, is our 18th year holding the Day of Dialogue, and it comes just before the presidential election. So as you see from the marketing that we've done, this is in preparation for the presidential election, and it's terrific that we have a starting panel that is run and organized by students from Dr. Eisenberg's history class. Maybe not all of you, but I understand it's where the idea emerged. The Center for Civic Engagement exists with the following mission: to offer educational, co-curricular, and cultural programs and activities that foster an awareness of local, national, and global issues, encouraging students to be active citizens and contributors to their local, national, and global communities. We have more than 30 faculty and administrators and some community members who advise our center. We have 16 undergraduate fellows that rotate. So if you think what we're doing today is interesting, either on the back table there or on the table just outside the doors, there's information there about the center and some of the programs that we offer. I invite you to take one of those and to consider what it is we do, and maybe if you could play a role in it as an undergraduate fellow. This day was started by one of our retired sociology professors, Cindy Bogard. And it exists as a way to get students and the community talking and listening to one another about issues of the day. And some people are good at talking, but it's probably better for us to practice some in listening, getting stronger at understanding where other people come from when it comes to the issues that we'll be talking about today. If we do it right today, you'll hear things you disagree with, and we ask you to hear those different voices out. There's no better way to begin than with a group of students who will share their thoughts about issues that they're concerned with regard to the presidential election, less than 2 weeks away. I don't believe it's hyperbole to say that this election will be one of the most consequential of our lifetimes. As newer voters, our students have much to say because for them, so much is at stake. Before we begin, though, I want to say a few words, brief words about the folks who helped make this possible. First of all is the Cultural Center, specifically Atheline Collins, Carol Mallison, and Janine Rinaldi. And without their effort and their expertise, all these events today could not have come together. The Center for Civic Engagement's undergraduate fellows, some of whom are with us, and our graduate assistants who are with us, Eliza Ortega and Alexa Sauter. They helped us put these together. And finally, a little of what we do is possible without the support of our provost, Charlie Reardon. Now, for this particular event, I do thank Dr. Rusty Eisenberg of the History Department for helping put the panel together. And to begin, I'd like to introduce the moderators of this discussion, Jacqueline Wetzel and James Curran, both secondary education majors of the class of 2020. You'd all be pressing on each other. So I think it's good that you sit where you're at. But don't feel because it's formal that you're not invited to share in the conversation. If you have points of view and you want to talk after the panel does offers its comments, please raise your hand and we have a mic in the back. Participate in the discussion actively. So with that said, I'd like to introduce James Curran.
We'll give this another try. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our panel on student perspectives in the 2024 election. I'm James Curran, as just mentioned. I'm majoring in secondary education. I'm looking to be a history teacher. And I have a lot of opinions to share about the election. A lot of data and studies that I performed. So yeah. Moving on. Do you guys all want to come and introduce yourselves one by one? Is that cool? Sure. Come with Jackie.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Wetzel. I'm a sophomore. I'm originally from California. I live on Long Island now. And I am a secondary ed, wanting to be a history teacher.
Hi, I'm Emerald Funk. I'm a freshman. I'm majoring in public advocacy and rhetoric, but I'm also a person in LEAP. I'm really interested in this election because I'm from Pennsylvania, which is a pretty big swing state. So to me, personally, it has a lot of weight.
Hi everyone, my name is Connor. I'm a freshman marketing major from New York City in the Bronx. I just happy to be here. Good to see everyone. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Gianna Marsh and I am a biology major. I am a freshman here at Hofstra and I'm just here to have fun.
So now that we're all introduced, I'm going to get into the background, how we found our topics that we wanted to talk about. So a little bit of backstory. Go back to the middle of the summer. I'm talking with some of my friends about the upcoming election, politics, what's going on, and I keep hearing from people my age, my friends, yeah, I don't think I'm going to vote this year, or I don't want to vote, and a myriad of reasons for why. And that was really worrying me because I think it's important as Americans for everyone to vote, but additionally, I think it's very important for our younger generation to take this democratic influence that we just now have and to actually use it and do something with it. So I had that running in the back of my mind. Walking into Dr. Eisenberg's class, Red State, Blue State, she starts saying, hey, we need students to give a panel, maybe do a little bit of research. And just put two and two together in my head. I thought that's a great idea. So I conducted a little Google poll, made a little Google poll. And I thought it would be very quick. It would be a little 2-minute thing. Just ask students, hey, are you between the ages of 18 and 25? Because I put that as kind of like a youth bracket. And are you going to vote in the upcoming election? Yes, no, maybe. And why? And why, it was like a text. So you could write a sentence or you could write multiple paragraphs, as some people did. But write as much or as little as you want and then submit. And from that, the results look something like this. I have a clicker here. This is what the Google Sheets looked like. And what we all did is we looked through the responses, as you can see on the right, for why, and found ones that resonated with us or we thought were interesting as reasons why people are or not voting, and analyze them further. We got some pretty interesting results. And I think Jackie is going to start us off.
Sorry. So the one that I picked was my quote. Is this one. I don't feel particularly good about either. Can it? It's not? Oh, okay. This one. Can everyone see? Okay. I don't feel particularly good about either. And then we added memes. I hope you enjoyed them. And then another person said, which I thought was pretty interesting, I want to exercise my right as an American citizen. This election is the first I can vote in, and it's the most consequential in my life so far. And one of the reasons why I chose this topic was because of the significance in the upcoming election. So we know who Donald Trump is and what he stands for. We had him for the 2016 and 2020 presidency. And we as a nation felt his presidential impact and President Biden's presidential impact from 2020 to now, 2024. As we have seen in the pollings and news, President Biden wanted to run for another term, but was not popular. So critics said he didn't have a chance, so ultimately he stepped down and nominated Kamala Harris, Biden's vice president, who has been nominated as a Democratic nominee and presidential candidate. Although she's very new and has gone to lengths explaining her background and what she stands for, my main curiosity in this was, even with Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's recent individual interviews, and as well as presidential debate and news coverage recently with Trump working at McDonald's. Pretty interesting. I wanted to investigate how much of a lack of confidence is there to this election, and how many people are going to vote, especially by generation, and how could this impact the election. So recent news coverages regarding Harris and Trump with interviews, Harris being 60 Minutes, which was October 7th of this year, MSNBC. She was recently on the Howard Stern Show, as well as the National Association of Black Journalists, September 17th, as well as Fox News. For Trump, it was Economic Club of Chicago, October 16th of this month, Fox News with different interviewers, and the New York Times. So the recent interviews from both candidates not only help the public to make more informed decisions of their favorable candidate, but also to show their moral values and economic outlook. So an article that I found, this is by age, our age is like 18 to 29, right? Only 66% of our generation is going to vote, whereas baby boomers is 94%. Now, looking at the difference in generation, obviously we're going to hold different values. So that's astronomical in the impact of this election. So keep in mind, baby boomers, like who are 65 age and plus, were born in 1946 to 1964. Generation X, 45-year-olds to 64, that's 1965 to 1980. Millennials, 30 to age 44, that's 1981 to 1996, so pretty recent. And then there's us, 1997 to 2012. So in the upcoming presidential election, 40.8 million members of Gen Z will be eligible to vote, including 8.3 million newly eligible youth, who will have aged into this electorate since the 2022 midterms. Another thing that I found even more interesting was roughly a third of eligible Americans do not vote in presidential elections despite the enormous attention paid to these contests. This research I got from the Pew Research Center, as well as being informed and aware of what's going on is very important. So the Institute for Citizens and Scholars recently did a poll that surveyed 4,008 young adults across the country. Now here's the scary thing. The civic knowledge that they conducted, only 40% were able to correctly answer 1 out of 4 civic questions. That's pretty sad. Like, that's crazy. And then regarding civic engagement on that topic, only 33% indicated no intention to participate civically in the 2024, including voting. So that means all those voices, they could have made like an impactful statement regarding the election. So we as this panel and as a group, we encourage you to vote no matter what your standing might be. We encourage you to be educated on this topic. One of the neutral articles that you can get your information from, because I know there's a lot of bias regarding the media, is Pew Research Center, The Guardian, Associated Press, Reuters, NPR, CBS News, and NBC News. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Emerald now. Oh, sorry, back to James.
Yeah. So yeah, great stuff, Jackie. What I found very interesting is that the CBS News poll of this youth demographic of 18 to 29, you had only 66% of the youth wanting to vote. But the results I got from my Google poll were totally different. As you can see, there's an overwhelming yes, with 83% giving an absolute yes, I'm going to vote, and even more, a 9% giving a maybe. So if you total that all together, that's almost 25% greater that my results of polling Hofstra students that they want to vote than just 18 to 29 as a whole. So I thought I'd look at some of the reasons why there's such a gap. And the first I got is that I primarily polled Hofstra students, and Hofstra is a university. There's students here. So universities are usually big like centers of political protest and demonstration, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks. So it makes sense that we'd be more interested in voting. Additionally, Hofstra is a liberal arts school whose students and values are usually associated with one specific party, the Democratic Party. So that's another reason why there's a gap in Hofstra students that I polled versus 18 to 29 as a whole. But it continues. Additionally, we have candidates directly campaigning for us. And I know it's off-center, it's bad, putting it in was bad, but I just found this morning and I thought it was really impactful. Kamala Harris obviously making a statement about canceling student debt. That directly affects all of us. So it makes sense that we would have more of a stake and more of a reason to go out and vote. But it goes even further. And this one's going to be a little bit of audience participation at some point. But one of the biggest responses as why people are voting that they kept giving over and over and over again in the responses is the idea that it's our job as Americans to go out and vote. Specifically, the phrase civic duty kept coming up over and over and over again. And I think it was very interesting because that made me think back to when I was in school. Now, just here comes audience participation. Raise your hand if when you were younger in elementary school, middle school, the idea of a civic duty as an American to go out and vote was something that you learned and remembered and something you heard about. Yeah, this is most of the crowd right here, right? So think about that. We all heard that in school, and we're all continuing our education now, so we were probably mostly thinking a lot about what we were learning in school when we were younger, and or paying attention to what we were learning in school when we were younger and really thinking about it. So it makes sense that we would be more critical and remember the civic duty part and factor that into why we're voting. But it goes even further, right? On top of the 82%, 83% that absolutely want to vote, there were even more Hofstra students that wanted to vote but thought they couldn't. This response I find extremely interesting. This person is just effectively saying that they would vote, but they can't because they're not in California, they're not in San Diego. But absentee ballots are a system that they could use to actually get their vote counted in the state that matters to them. So in case anyone doesn't know, the absentee ballot system effectively allows students to mail their vote back home and have it counted. So I thought, I knew about this system, but I'm from Long Island, so it didn't really affect me. So I thought I'd look into it and see how available information on it is. So first thing I did, I Googled, I said, hey, help, want my vote to count in San Diego. I'm from San Diego, but my vote I'm currently in New York. Is there any way I could get my vote to count over there? Immediately, multiple United States government websites came up explaining absentee ballots, how they work, and specifically saying, driving it home, if you are a student and you are in school out of state, you can easily get your vote counted at home. But then I thought I'd even take it a step further and see what Hofstra specifically is doing to make people aware of this. So you know those Hofstra vote stations, they're in the student center or sometimes they're around here in the library and you can register to vote at those. I went up to those, I said, hey, I'm from San Diego, help, I want to vote, is there anything I could do so my vote counts over there? And immediately they walked me through the whole thing, the deadlines, how to get it mailed, they gave me more resources. So what I've concluded is that the information on absentee ballots are out there, but there might not be awareness of it. So maybe a sign or two, some kind of public service announcement, maybe even a social media post, just informing the youth that the absentee ballot system is a thing and it can help you if you want your vote to count in your state. I think that would be very impactful because this wasn't the only one. There were other examples, other responses of other states. This whole sentiment came up a couple of times. And if it was maybe 6 or 7 out of 130 responses, you'd only think about how many students that is across the country that aren't voting that can, and they don't think they can. Now, finishing up, this isn't the whole quote. That's not an error that the end quotation isn't there. I'm excluding part of it. There's a little symbol at the end of this that I think totally changes the message, and it's interesting to think about how it changes it once you see it. Now, boom, right? Seeing that, I know it's kind of goofy, but that emoji, when I saw that, that totally changed the tone and the message that I got from this statement. And I think that's a very good way to transition to what Connor has to say about the way that social media impacts the perception of political messaging.
Okay. So basically what James was saying, great job, by the way. Emojis, especially now, there's a lot of digital technologies and mediums that people use to convey messages. So something like a sad face or a sobbing emoji could mean an entirely different thing, and we have to be mindful of the connotations of new trends. So looking at the presidential election, it's important to analyze the impact of social media and the importance of being literate in media. So for example, there are two platforms that are really big in discussing this election, which are X, which was formerly Twitter, and TikTok. Both have been mediums for spreading political messages, and both Trump and Kamala's campaigns have taken form there with the Kamala HQ accounts and the Team Trump accounts. So starting with X in general, a majority of users, about 65%, say they use X to get their daily news. And obviously that doesn't sound very safe because anyone on X, it's like a Wikipedia. You can post anything from anywhere, anonymously or not, and someone can take it as truth. And 59% say they use X to specifically keep up with politics. So if your only source of news is through these social media platforms, you're getting the views of someone else, and there's no guarantee that it is a verified source. And from X specifically, 86% of users say they encounter posts that they believe to be misinformation, which is, again, that big point that you don't know what you're getting, you don't know where it's coming from, you don't have the information to back it up. And to narrow it down to Gen Z specifically, how many of you here have TikTok downloaded on your phone? Okay, that's a lot of people in the crowd. And how many of you get news updates from TikTok occasionally? Yep, okay. So over 71% of Gen Z, and like we saw in this room, get news from TikTok, and 39% say it's their sole source of news, which is, again, coming back to the big point of where is this information coming from. And it brings me to what both of these apps, X and TikTok, have in common. And that is misinformation spreads a lot faster, by almost 70%. So this is a poll from Redline Digital, and they surveyed, I think, a population of 1,000 people and asked how many of them trust these social media platforms to deliver news. And it was last updated in June of 2024. So as you can see, Twitter has 16% saying yes, it's trusted, to 45% saying no, it's not. And that kind of trend continues through Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, with a disparity between the yeses and the nos. So how can you distinguish between what's truth and what's not when you're looking on social media? Because it's not as simple as saying, well, this account is verified, it must be true. If anyone was on TikTok in 2020, you might have seen videos of someone dancing, like Addison Rae or Bryce Hall. They did funny, silly, entertaining videos, and they got a verified badge. But now, 4 years later, they still have that verified badge, but that doesn't automatically qualify them to speak on certain subjects, and it doesn't make them a trusted source or an expert opinion. So, misinformation, though, in general, it's not just, oh, well, this is a false statement. It's also presenting something out of context. So, for example, following Hurricane Helene and Milton, you might have seen TikToks surfacing of Trump throwing paper towels into a crowd and saying, this is so insensitive, don't vote for him. But what you won't see on those videos is that was from 2017, over 7 years ago, and people are framing it as if it happened just in the past month. So misinformation, it's a lot of, it can be truthful, it can be deceitful, but all of it is taken out of context to skew your perspective of things. So it's how you can combat it that really matters here. And some of the ways you can combat it is to fact check all your information. What you see on social media should not be taken as truth just because it's posted from an account from someone you like or because you think it's credible. You should always fact check what you're getting from these online platforms, which is why from the Harvard Library we have a list of news outlets and their biases and trustworthiness. So at the top of the pyramid, it's thoroughly considered to be truthful. It's pretty moderate in terms of bias, is the Pew Research Center. A lot of the statistics I've pulled for this presentation is from Pew Research, and I think the same is with James and Jackie's segments. So as you go up the pyramid, you can see some of the biases, starting with like CNN, a little more left-leaning, but they are still considered to be truthful. Same with NBC, ABC. There's Fox, which is a little more right-leaning. But then as you go down the pyramid, you see things like Conservative Daily News. It's towards the bottom right of the pyramid, so it's saying it has a lot of bias towards the right, and it contains a lot of misleading info. And on the left, you can see the same with some of these podcasts, like Gay Politics, which is the name of the podcast, not trying to do a jab or anything, but as you can see, there's a lot of misinformation around, and just because it's a media source doesn't necessarily mean it's free of bias or free of misinformation. So it's important, if you want to find this list, you can just search up Harvard Library media sources. It'll pop up. It should be the first link. You can verify that the sources you're using are safe and trustworthy. So yeah, this all goes into the point that media literacy is really important with this election. You want to make sure that the information you are receiving and spreading is one of truth, especially when you're coming to vote, because you want to make an informed decision. Which brings me to the quote that I got from James's Google poll, Kamala is brat. So some people said the only reason they're going to vote is because they like Kamala's social media presence. They think she's trendy, she's hip, she's fun. And that's all, it's fun. You can have that opinion of a candidate. You like the personality, you like how they respond to other people, how they act in groups. But you have to be mindful of not voting just because you like a personality, but because you like policy. And I also want to just clarify for people who maybe don't know, brat isn't like the spoiled, immature kid in this connotation. It's more confident, fun, and it's based on an album by Charlie XCX, which released this summer. Just in case you weren't aware, so in this connotation, it is considered a good thing. But yeah, so you don't want to just vote based on the trends, because the social media presence of both candidates, especially on TikTok, are drawing on trends to try to engage Gen Z, but that doesn't really inform you of their political stances or policies. That's what you want to pay attention to as this election unfolds. And it's especially important if you're from a swing state, which is where I'm going to pass it off to Emerald to give a talk.
All right. Thank you very much. So, as mentioned previously, I am from Pennsylvania, which makes it pretty important to this vital election because if you didn't know, we are engaging in 7 different swing and or battleground states, specifically to this election, that are majorly important. Because you hear probably a lot, 270 to win, right? Which is the idea that you need 270 electoral votes to win and become president, right? So we have the 7 states. We have Pennsylvania with 19 electoral votes, Georgia with 16, North Carolina with 16, Michigan with 15, Arizona with 11, Wisconsin with 10, and Nevada with 6, right? So that's a total of 93 electoral votes, which is a significant chunk, right? Because when you're talking about swing states and all these other things, right, you're talking about states that matter because they're unpredictable. When you have states like California, where you can depend on a blue vote, they're not going to campaign as much in these kind of states because they can depend on that Democratic vote towards like Kamala's campaign. So the quote that I picked was, every vote counts, especially in swing states. Even though my home isn't a swing state, I still believe that it's important to vote. So this is the idea that people in swing states, right, have a more important vote because swing states are more important. That isn't necessarily true, but it is where a lot of these campaigns tend to focus, right? Because that's 93 electoral votes that are completely unpredictable, which can swing an election a very specific way. So current leads, specifically in the swing states, you have North Carolina with Trump up by 1, Nevada with Harris up by 1, Pennsylvania with Harris up by 1, Wisconsin up by 1, Georgia up by 2 for Trump, Arizona up by 2 for Trump, and Michigan up with Harris for 1. That is today's polls from the New York Times. These polls are completely unpredictable. Yesterday you could check and it was like, they're up by 1 or they're up by 2, and it could be a completely different candidate today, right? And that's a very small margin. Being up by 1 in Pennsylvania means very little, because in 2 days they could be like, oh, Pennsylvania's up by 2 for Trump, right? So it's kind of unreliable, and also this is the idea that polls themselves are kind of unreliable. As we've seen in past elections and votes, polls, especially popular polls, don't always tell the end of the election. Like when we saw with Trump previously and Hillary Clinton, Hillary had a very popular poll, and everyone thought she was going to win, and they depended on that because they were like, okay, the polls are telling me that Hillary's going to win. She didn't. So it's very reliable that you have to remember that polls can't always be completely trusted. And then when we're talking about swing states and battleground states, you might wonder why states like Pennsylvania are swing, right? Because PA is huge and it has 900 electoral votes, but then you also have these big cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh that make a lot of people in that natural area to tend to be more Democratic. So why isn't PA Democratic, especially now that it has a Democratic governor? Well, it's because you have a difference between rural and urban areas in Pennsylvania, especially with a state as big as Pennsylvania, right? So you have, in gray, more urban areas, like you see Philadelphia and whatnot, and then you have all this white. Those are all considered to be rural counties of PA. However, these counties have completely different population counts, right? So Philadelphia has some 1,580,000 people in it, which is a lot of people, and that's a lot of voters, right? And then when you're talking about another big city, Pittsburgh, 300,000 people are in Pittsburgh from the 2020 count, right? And then you have, for example, in Lancaster, that tends to be a lot more rural, but it is still big. You have around 58,000 people. However, 30 or so thousand of those people happen to be Amish, and the Amish don't tend to vote. At least in the last decade or so, they have not engaged in Democratic voting, especially in Pennsylvania. But that's about 30,000 people in that really dense population who just will not vote, which is partially why Pennsylvania is completely unpredictable, because even if you go, okay, but Lancaster has 58,000 people, 30,000 of those people reliably probably won't vote, which is why in states like Pennsylvania, you have this kind of swing thing, because you have these more rural areas that tend to be about 26% of PA's population tends to be in rural farmland, right? So that's a decent amount of people who tend to probably lean more Republican, but then you also have 1 million or so people in Philadelphia, which tend to lean more Democratic for urban areas. So you have to kind of keep in mind that with big states and also swing states, you're having this battle between urban and rural and the parties they tend to pick. So another thing with swing states that happened recently is Hurricane Helene, as previously mentioned, right? So Hurricane Helene actually ran through 2 swing states, and it was a really big thing, especially in the campaigns, because natural disasters tend to get a lot of coverage, right? So thousands of people's lives were upended in Hurricane Helene, with there being at least 230 deaths among Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia, right? So that's pretty rough for a hurricane, especially nowadays. So not even 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene, however, Hurricane Milton came and ran through Florida, which was equally as devastating, with floodgates, and the entire state went into lockdown. A big thing with these hurricanes specifically, though, is both were considered to be supercharged hurricanes because they hit they were Category 1, and then they hit the Gulf of Mexico, where the waters have been ultra warm from global warming, and they skyrocketed in severity. So from Category 1, Hurricane Helene became a Category 4 hurricane, and then Hurricane Milton became a Category 5, luckily slowed down to a 3 before it hit Florida. But Hurricane Helene would not have been as impactful or as rough as it had been for these states if there hadn't been global warming involved. So that became a bit of an argument between parties, because they're like, oh, look at the proof of this global warming, right? because it's impactful, and we just had a hurricane that was supercharged by global warming run through a bunch of swing states and damage a lot of people's lives. So that became very political quickly as well. A big thing with Hurricane Milton is a news clip went viral of a veteran meteorologist crying as he described it on the news, because he was like, this is terrible and it's really horrific, because a hurricane category 5 would have been devastating to a state like Florida. Luckily it slowed down to a 3, but that was a very viral thing that passed around, was this meteorologist crying about a hurricane on live news. So both of our presidential candidates have had plenty to say about these devastating hurricanes and what happens now. So Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have spent a lot of time giving out federal aid and visiting these states to try and help people affected who have had their homes destroyed or who needed to be rescued from like mass flooding and whatnot. Trump during this time has used public things like Truth Social and whatnot to push several misconceptions, which created a bit of an argument between two parties. So Trump's claims were that the federal government is purposely neglecting heavily dominated Republican areas that were affected, that FERMA is giving money to illegal immigrants, and they're only giving $750 in cash to survivors, and that if you do apply for federal aid and for hurricane, the government is going to take your property. So these were all pretty wild misconceptions, right? And Joe Biden responded that it's got to stop. Moments like these, there are no red or blue states. So they both took advantage of what should have been like a come-together moment, as these people were affected by terrible hurricanes, to polarize the parties. Because Kamala is going to talk about, oh, she's giving a lot more aid to you. She's actively helping these people. And Trump's like, the federal government is lying to you. I could help you more as president. I would do more for you, right? So they took something that should have been a come together and they made it a lot more polarized, which brings you to like polarization, especially in states, which is why you have that like California votes blue, Florida tends to vote red. Swing states are important because they tend to be less polarized, or they have areas that spread them out to make them less polarized. But when you have two candidates that tend to lean extremely hard into several policies, it can make people very uneasy, especially in swing states, to put their vote towards them. Because a lot of people in America tend to lean more in the middle. But because of our choices, it makes you go off to the side very fast, right? Because when you're like, oh, but I don't necessarily believe in either or candidate, but I have to pick one, it can push you really far out, which brings us to Gianna's point.
Hi, again. Okay, so I'm going to shift the energy just a little bit. So I'm going to tell you a story that I promise will prove its relevance by the end. So I was born and raised in Queens, New York, to two Jamaican parents. So my parents are very religious and sent my older brother to a Christian school. So I, on the other hand, went to a public school until my parents could figure out how they were going to afford to put us both into Christian school. Now, everything changed when my brother would come home singing "Glory, Glory, Hallelujah," and I would come home singing "Who Let the Dogs Out." So before I knew it, I was transferred, and lo and behold, I'm here at this new school. I was in 4th grade when Donald Trump ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016, and the adults around me thought that the election results were a no-brainer. Many of them believed that they didn't have to vote. Even my own father didn't think that he would have to vote because Hillary would more than likely win. So all I knew hearing this discussion was that I wanted to vote really badly. So you could only imagine my excitement when the school that I went to announced that it would be doing a mock election day, where we, the people under the age of 18, would finally get a say. So the point of this little anecdote was to not tell you who won the 2016 election according to my little Christian school, though if you really want to know, stick around at the end. Instead, I say this to tell you that that experience made me look forward to finally getting an opportunity to vote. So anyways, enough about me now. Quickly, by show of hands, how many of you have heard the phrase, "My vote won't matter"? That's quite a bit of people. How about, "My singular vote won't change the outcome of the election"? Also, quite a bit of hands. So I'm here to address the concern to anyone who feels like there's just no point in voting in the election. So, according to the National Public Radio, about 1/3 of Americans do not cast their vote or did not cast their vote in the last presidential election, with 23% not being interested in politics at all and 16% feeling that their vote would not make a difference. According to Harvard's Institute of Politics, there's the claim that 53% of young voters are planning on voting in the upcoming 2024 election. So what happens to the other 47%? Well, I'm here to inform you that your vote does count. If you're thinking, the popular vote doesn't determine the election, the Electoral College does, then let's delve more into the details of how the Electoral College functions. Each candidate has their own electors, known as a slate. And when we vote for a candidate, we technically vote to ensure that they get the electoral votes for your state. But what if my state always votes for the same political party, since Ronald Reagan, hello. The only thing I can say is imagine if everyone held that same mindset. Then no one's voice would be heard. Personally, I find that the mindset that my singular vote will determine the election is very, it encourages me to vote, but I am constantly reminded that that is just my chronically delusional voices in my head. So, regardless of the arguably narcissistic nature of that mindset, to a lesser extreme, everyone should view their vote and their voice as valuable. As currently eligible voters, we have a responsibility to emphasize the importance of voting to younger generations, as Jackie said. I think that younger generations, people who are currently not able to vote, should grow up knowing that voting is important and it is one of the best ways to bring about change, like my little Christian school did for me. So I'm just here to remind you that please vote.
I thank you all. We're going to take the stage now and open up for questions.
We have a mic set up there. If any of you have comments or questions in response to what you've heard or have your own thoughts about the issues of this election, please come up and share what you have to say. And as we wait for you to gather what you want to say, I'm going to put to all of you, what do you believe for you is the top issue as you plan to vote for this election, in this election? Sure, whoever.
Personally, I think that foreign affairs are incredibly important in this election. And something that kind of worried me, it was one of the panels a couple weeks back, but I think it was foreign country perspectives on the election. They had some kind of statistic that more people were a lot more worried about internal American issues, and that was influencing the way they were voting, and not foreign affairs. But I think what's going on in multiple parts of the world right now and what we can do to maybe negotiate a little bit more is super important. And I think there should be more spotlight on that.
To James's point, I do agree that there's a lot of economic factors involved, along with trade, seeing that Kamala Harris has pressed issues on tariffs, as well as Donald Trump saying that he would do 100% tariffs, and how that can affect the American people long term, seeing as our generation is in college and we're about to move to being adults in a working society, so that how that might affect us, the cost of living, as well as the upholding of democracy and truth and integrity as a nation and being a citizen of the United States.
Thank you. Emerald?
I care a lot about healthcare. I'm chronically ill, and I know a lot of people who are chronically ill. So I have a disease called Crohn's disease, and it affects my every function ever. And we've talked a lot about insurance and whatnot in current policy, especially with the vice presidential debate when J.D. Vance had some things to say. And as a student who's already paying a lot of loans, I can't really worry too bad about whether or not I'm going to be able to get my medication this month to have a quality of living that allows me to continue to study education. Mm-hmm. So I think for me a big thing is when we're talking about the insulin cap and whether or not people will be able to get their medication, elderly, ill or whatnot. More people tend to be ill than they tend to be healthy. So I care a lot about that healthcare type ideology.
Okay, thank you. Connor?
Yeah, for me, I think the most important issue is the sustainability of the candidate that I vote for. Will they bring the country in the direction that it will continue to function and stay a place that we can express ourselves and hold our values and not be judged or criticized for them? Will it be a place where I can then grow up and raise a family in? Is it a place I'd want to raise a family in? I just want to make sure that my vote is going to someone who is going to keep the country in a sound place that we can continue to grow and thrive in. That's.
Thank you. Gianna?
Yeah. So as a woman of color, as a Black woman, I try to ensure that with my vote and with who I choose to vote for, I find a candidate that would most attain to issues that are focused in minority groups. Specifically, the issue of, I guess, the polarization between Israel and Palestine right now and how that affects people of the Jewish community and people of the Arab, Muslim, Palestinian community as well. I find those topics to be very, very important, and that we don't dismiss what is going on outside of the United States, and to make sure that with who we put in office, those individuals have everyone's best interests at heart.
Okay. Still waiting for thoughts from the... Oh, please, take the mic. You can get in line if you wish.
Good morning. My question is for Gianna. So, as you previously mentioned, many of us have heard others say that their vote is insignificant. So what do you feel is the best way to encourage those who may not want to vote?
I would say, it would have to start early on. So, how for my school, we did mock elections. We made it fun. I was really excited to get the little stupid sticker. So just things like that to encourage the younger generation. For us now, I would say to raise awareness to how politics directly affects us young people. And my fellow panelists brought up how Kamala Harris is focused on student debt and loans and things of that nature that directly affect us who are students. So I would say just being more aware of how our issues, if you're into the environment and protecting the environment, just explaining how politics can help, or how people who don't share those values, how that can negatively impact what you're interested in.
It's a great point, Gianna. Just on that question too, one more thing I wanted to add that I think for me a lot, like a logic perspective. When I was younger, I said that like my vote doesn't matter, but it's the very, very simple philosophy of, okay, well, what if everyone thought that and no one went and voted? And you presented that a lot in your talk about how like they didn't even vote for Hillary because they thought it was a sure thing. But I think that's very impactful. Like we all have to do our part. And even if your candidate doesn't win, it's not an all or nothing thing. By having more voters for one party in one state, even if that party doesn't win, Democrats see that, or politicians see that, and they will take note and they will change their policies to accommodate you. So even if your candidate doesn't win, or if you think your vote doesn't matter, for multiple reasons, it actually really does.
Yes,
Thank you
for that question.
As you guys have said, polarization is a very important problem and a very big problem. Do you believe that there's any way to eliminate the polarization gap? And if so, what steps would any, if not all parties would have to take in order to eliminate that barrier?
Okay, so I'll start. This might be very extreme, but I truly believe that we should have more than two political parties, like two major political parties. I feel like the idea of having only two options, like Emerald said, it creates much discourse that I feel like we would see that more people are actually more in the middle in terms of how they view the political system that we have. I think that if we had maybe like two more, that would just create a better environment for people who are not necessarily comfortable voting for either party as we have it now.
Fantastic question, by the way. I think partially a big thing is that nowadays, specifically, you'll see all over social media is debate. Debate is everywhere. We have so much debate that we completely lack social discourse in a lot of ways. Sitting down and having like productive conversations with someone, even someone who just doesn't like agree with you on a slight stance. Like if I say something specific when you're like, but you lack nuancy, like here, that's important. And doing it in a way that's not like, I'm trying to convince you that you're wrong is so important. Because having a discussion and not an argument, because like the thing about debate is in debate you are trying to win. You are trying to actively gain something out of someone else or take them down a notch, something like that. And you'll see it all over podcasts and social media and news. It's just debate. You're not having anyone actually talking about like why they see the difference or acknowledging that the other point might have a point, but this is what I think is better. So the art of rhetoric has kind of been lost in a lot of ways because instead of talking about like the way that argumentation works in a convincing manner, we just argue. So I think in order to have like less polarization, we need to first be able to have civil discourse that doesn't end in like these I'm better than you, I'm fighting for you, I have better morality than you kind of matches.
Just to add on to Emerald's point, it's also not only talking with other people who are different from you and share different views from you, but it's also learning from one another. And it's also about self-advocation and education and the power of it. It's understanding American politics and the significance of it and how much it's changed over time. And applying that to today's politics and ever-evolving history and its significant impact. And it's understanding, okay, well, this might be my reality and my reality like in California that I lived in. But the reality of someone else, like who lived in Pennsylvania, who lived in Michigan, who lived in Tennessee, those are completely different factors. So the more that we start asking the tough questions and having like difficult conversations, and sometimes can even be uncomfortable, the more we get to learn about each other and the different realities and standpoints of how much does this person like in this state, how much do they have more than this state, and what can we do to better help each other? Because we are the United States, and we are the people.
Just to add again, because that really was an excellent question. I think that a lot of it has to do with the media and the way the media is set up, and I don't necessarily know how it can change. So be honest. Raise your hand if you watched the presidential debate. Okay. Actually, there's a lot of people. This is more than I was expecting. This is great. Now, think about the amount of people that watched the whole presidential debate versus the amount of people that saw a quick clip on social media of Trump saying something ridiculous about people eating dogs and cats, right? So many more people saw that clip. And yeah, people are laughing about it now. It's funny, right? But the person who posted that clip on social media likely did it with the purpose of profiting. Oh, people are looking at my posts. Money, right? You even said with Connor, people were posting pictures of Trump throwing paper towels, but that was actually an older clip. That was just made to demonize him and get views because people like to see headlines like that. How many people know Fox News parents that swear by Fox News and live off their headlines and polarization, and that's their source of media, right? Because news networks are set up in a way that demonize one candidate and love another one because that's what gets people to repeatedly watch. But then you have a problem of the media is set up to have these crazy headlines and not really have conversation like we were saying, like everyone else is saying is important, and just look at what this candidate's doing, look at what that candidate's doing. And I don't really know a way that can change without changing the fundamental parts of social media. Like I don't know how we could have those clips of Trump saying ridiculous things about cats and dogs on social media and not have people laugh about it without playing into this system in some sort of way. But yeah, excellent question again. Great. Go ahead.
Okay, so a lot of you mentioned that you're aspiring history educators. In the event that a conservative politician gets into office and we're under more and more of a conservative influence, how would you combat that by making sure that the whole lesson gets taught in a history class? How do you? Because it's really up to you to make sure that the future students and generations get that full idea of what actually happened in history. How would you combat the Fox News parents?
I didn't really think about that, but you just put a new nightmare on my radar.
Yeah.
But yeah, like book bannings and stuff like that is such a huge deal. I'll be honest, I don't really know. From my understanding, if it's a standardized, like a statewide thing, that I can't say something or talk about something, it's kind of tough. Okay. And I really hope that continued awareness and conversations like this continue to spread and make sure that doesn't happen. But yeah, great point.
Another thing that would be impactful, because that is a major decision, which I haven't thought about either, because that's just really scary. It would be, well, obviously it depends on every district and every state because each has their own different policy, but a lot of self-advocation, especially like having parent-teacher night or like finding ways to connect with parents and guardians and be like, not so much opinionated conversations, but just more factual. Like, this is the course of history. History itself is not always pretty. It does have different aspects of it that not everyone wants to have a conversation about, but it's led us to where we are now. So I think stressing the importance of that and teaching it to students and giving them options of like, if you go to the library, you can give this book. There's also the internet as well that's for free. Just the self-advocation and the drive to be knowledgeable on different topics and to not fall into the category of being ignorant and arrogant, because we as a nation need to move forward. So forward is good, backwards, no. So just, yeah.
From a perspective, I came from a very, very conservative high school. My school board was all about book bannings and gender identity and everything else. I was actually the founder of my GSA in middle school. But I was like one of maybe 5 gay kids in my area, and it was huge. And like a big thing about it is that if you're a teacher, I'm public advocacy, so I will not teach because me and kids do not match. But like, you have to engage with students on a personal level. I think the more you make personal connections with people of all like cultures and everything else is the more things become accessible. So from a student standpoint, the more that you actively let your kids get involved in social advocacy and rhetoric and just like being community involved is the more that they're going to discover safe spaces. For as much hate as I got, and I got lots of hate, I got like pretty much a really loud group of support too. Because I went out and I when my school board was doing crazy things. I went and I found the Democratic Party of Pennsylvania, and I talked to like the Hanover YCA and all these things, right? These little groups who I could find advocacy in and I could find safe spaces. And if you can't find a safe space, sometimes you need to take the initiative to make one yourself. But as a teacher, you can't always take that initiative, so it's important to get your students to act in that civil discourse. Because the more your students are involved, the more power they actually have. Because at a point, yes, parents do have a lot of they do have a lot of grasp on education, but especially in like high school and middle school, you have autonomy. And as a kid and as a student, you have the right to have an opinion to your own education. And the more that you take control over that from your parents, the more education's going to be based around what you want to know, and the more you're going to see what you want to see. And that's where progress really flourishes. Because when you see, like for example, when I started the GSA and I was like, maybe I'm the only gay person in all of Hanover, Pennsylvania, I started meeting people who were scared. And then suddenly I had a group, and I had an entire GSA, and I ended up getting like a group of like 26 kids in that GSA. And that was just like unthinkable to these people in Hanover. But it was this idea that like, if you are confident enough as a student or as a person to be authentically who you are, you're going to inspire that in other people, and then suddenly you're not alone. So I think it's big about like getting your students involved and being authentically you, even in like converse of hate. So that's where I kind of stand.
I'd like, if I may add too, it's important to recognize that you don't have to operate alone. So as you brought up, you started to organize with others, and then you have the strength of your group, not just a single voice trying to make a decision in a history class. I bring this up gratuitously because there's an event later about organizing to strengthen your position, so you might attend that if you're interested. With Dr. Tresciati helped to organize that, who is in rhetoric and public advocacy as I am. But anyway, thank you for that. Your question?
Hi. I kind of want to go back to the topic of misinformation, and like since it was already brought up, like the statement made by Trump, do you believe that there is a way to stop or regulate candidates from spreading misinformation while like addressing like us or America in general?
Unfortunately, as part of the Constitution, we do have a First Amendment right to free speech, and the only limitation that is known to that is you can't use it to spread or incite violence. So, on a level of can you prevent someone from saying something? No, you can't. But like I said, it's really up to you to do your fact checking and make sure the statements you're hearing from candidates or anyone really is something that's verified and true. And it's up to you or like a group of people to make sure the information you're receiving is truthful, and don't just because, if you were a fan of Trump or a fan of Harris, you're not just going to take their word for truth. Like always, always, always do your research, and that's really the only thing you can do.
I think other than that, a big thing is about just adding in the other voice. So even if you're saying like, okay, let's say Donald Trump goes on Twitter and he posts something outrageous and crazy, and all these people are just like, what? Right? A good way to combat that something is to make something that attaches to that. For example, we see now in like more social media feeds like that fact-checking box, but it's not actually fact-checking. It's like a section that says, readers would like you to know context, right? So a lot of times I think the power of information, like misinformation, comes from when it's its sole like standing. If you remove context out of anything, misinformation becomes like this sole factual ideology. So the more you can add context, even if you personally are like, oh, I know that's not true, if you add context to that conversation, suddenly the people around you are going to add their own context and ideas, right? It's just about taking that first step into adding context. So even if like we see more of these social media boxes where it's like readers would like you to know this, or readers would like you to know that, this idea of like providing context, even if it's just like in a warning under things, can be very powerful. Because even just like the label of this has been flagged for misinformation can be enough to put in one person's mind, oh, maybe I should doubt this. So that kind of thing I think is important, but it's better than just doing outright fact-checking, in my opinion. I don't think you should just outright fact-check things, because that's when you get people arguing over facts themselves. But like just a suggestion of this is misinformation, or this is where you need context, can give people the inspiration to go and find that actual like information themselves. But sometimes you just need like the little helping hand that tells you, hey, you should check this out more. And that's what usually I think gets people to go and look at things in more depth.
And actually, to Emerald's point, when we were preparing for this panel, part of their segment was to talk about the hurricanes, and the video of Trump throwing paper towels came up. And I was like, well, I actually saw that was from 7 years ago. It was old and outdated. And Emerald had no idea. So it goes back to that idea, like you can always add the context to other people, but it's also, when you see that context, like, you know, you can verify it yourself as well. It's always good to have options when it comes to making sure what you're seeing is the truth.
And just to quickly add on to that, I think a large part of it is understanding that there is rhetoric behind everything that a candidate will say. And you have to understand that their goal at the end of the day is to get you to vote for them. So they can say and do whatever, but you just have to understand that everything is for that goal. So if something seems off or if something seems so outlandish, it is probably how it is. It's probably presented that way to arouse an emotion out of the viewer. So just understanding where the candidate themselves is coming from when they say the things that they say can allow for you to make that step to delve more into the context of the situation.
Thank you.
Okay, hello. So you spoke about earlier about how misinformation is spreading, and especially on social media. And you guys also talked about how misinformation is spreading, and how being that there's two Democratic parties, you kind of have to choose instead of between two things instead of being in the middle. So how would you say, what type of changes would America need to radically change their system? Because I feel like that's what's strongly needed, and I feel like sometimes it can discourage people from saying I don't want to, vote for this person, and then you kind of have the thought that, okay, well, I have to pick the person who's less worse, even though they don't stand for what I stand for. And I also, another question is, how do you feel capitalism affects these two parties in our government? And how would you say people can be informed by the three different branches in our government and how they have an individual impact on these parties themselves?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, addressing the first, part of your question about how the radicalization would have to come about, I think partially it has to do with the rise in independence. The more we get from independence and the more people who are I don't like this party system, I'm going to do my own thing, or even smaller groups like libertarians or whatnot, the more that those groups themselves become larger, I think the more less polarized we can become, because there's a lot of people who used to be really strong Republicans or really strong Democrats who are now sitting in the independent party, right? And a big thing with independence is we don't really see a lot of independent politicians. And I think the more we do see independence, the more options we're going to have that don't have to conform to the party system. Because the nice thing about independent, right, is it means that they don't agree with necessarily either party. They can pick ideologies from them. But even if, let's say there's a large group of independents, and a large group of independents all agree on one ideology, it would be their right to create a new party if they wanted one. But I think it has to do with the idea that you can step out of the parties first. Because if you're really strong Republican or you're really strong Democrat, you might feel pressured from your parents being really strong Republicans that you need to be one way or the other. But the more that you realize you have options and that you can go elsewhere, the more it's going to be important. Because you'll see on the ballot every single year this one random independent candidate, and no one knows who they are. And the nice thing is that independents have options. They just need to look into them more, and there needs to be more word around being a part of the independent party. So I think that would be a big thing for how you would have to step out of the blue or the red, would to be going completely gray at first and then separating from there.
And even to that point, it will be, like, to be truthful, it's going to be a long time before you see a breakaway from the two major parties, Democrats and Republicans. But just because you identify as one or the other doesn't mean you can't vote for someone on the other side if you agree with their policies more. So you can be a Democrat and you can vote for whoever's running as a Democratic president. But then you can also vote for a Republican senator if you think that they would do a better job. It's not just about voting for every single Democrat just because you're a Democrat. You can make the choice and understand what each of them would do for you and vote based on that.
Just to add on, the saying Rome wasn't built in a day applies to our government now. How it is today may not be the exact same as it is from a year or 5 years from now, which is honestly pretty frustrating because we as a young generation want to see the change. So why not be the change, you know? Like, one example that I can think of is like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Once in a lifetime, all the votes and the advocacy that she gave for women, that changed drastically, right? So like, even if you personally don't agree with either candidate, why not in some way not only bring attention, but also change to bring a new mindset forward? Whoever you know, whether it be someone in the healthcare system, whether it be public service or whatever, be that change instead of saying, oh, I wish. Because what is wishing going to do?
Right.
On that point further, when we're talking about these alternate things, I think another thing that we lack is that most of the time when we see politicians, we either just see them being just politicians or businessmen, or you have lawyers or attorneys. You don't really see anyone from like an environmental science degree being in politics. And that can create a severe lack in like ideology, because we have these agencies, right, like the Environmental Protection Agency and all this stuff, and they are experts, but in actual politics, no one from like environmental science is going to be huge in our government working, and they should be. If you're in a health science or you're in engineering or you are an electrician and you're like, I have things to say about these specific like policies and things, why not get involved? Because even if your like degree or your ideology or any of your information isn't like normally political or normally used in politics or government, it can be, and I guarantee that it has an important place in our democracy as a whole. Because a big thing about like our government, and especially with the three branches and whatnot, is that especially like when you think about the House of Representatives, when you have some random businessman from Pennsylvania being a Pennsylvania senator, that's not all going to represent PA, right? A electrician could know just as much as some of the other people. It's just about bringing more, I think, general knowledge and more wisdom from other parts of the world into our government that's going to create that big thing. Because, like, if you're a part of Gen Z and you have a weird degree and you just, like, we're like, well, I'm interested in this and my degree has taught me that and I think I can bring this knowledge into our government, that's important. Get involved. Even if you're like, I'm going to go on to be a nurse or whatnot, you can still be politically involved without necessarily being in, like, direct government. And I think that's what's important, is that civic like involvement, and also the idea that no matter from where you come from or what degree you have or what information you have, one part of that is important, and I guarantee that it hasn't been like brought up or it hasn't been utilized enough. So don't be afraid from anywhere that you're at to get involved if you think you know something or you have something to contribute, because it's likely that you do.
Yeah. Just to quickly add on to that, my parents are both first generation, both immigrants. So one of the things they both taught me is that your voice is your greatest advocate. And who you are as a person, that means something. And if you can get a bunch of people together that share the same views and want change, then that's one hell of a kick.
Yeah, and just to further emphasize Emerald's point, I'm a biology major. I almost hesitated to be a part of this because, I mean, my focus is not politics, history, any of those things. But I do find climate change to be one of my major passions when I approach the political scene. I feel like it's also important to understand that even if you might not be the most knowledgeable person in the political atmosphere, like Emerald said, bringing the knowledge that you do have, like bringing the knowledge of environmental, I guess, situations or biological information that could be effective in a political scene. I feel like everyone should be able and feel comfortable expressing their knowledge, even if they're not necessarily the most politically active person, but someone that does have an interest in something.
Thank you, guys.
To your point, Gianna, she's a retired professor at Stony Brook, Nancy Goroff, who ran for Congress in this last cycle. She didn't win the nomination, but to my knowledge, wasn't very political. And people in her community started trying to ban books through the library and started trying to affect the school, the Board of Education. And she began to organize, as you were saying, that kick, and started fighting against that. And then she started seeing her horizons change. So regardless of where you are in terms of your expertise, eventually these issues show up on your own doorstep, and you can either choose to work together to fight back or change things or not. I think it was a great point. Thank you. Yep.
I believe this question was like answered. It was one of you on one of you guys' slides, but I think the slide kind of went by fast. So I was gonna say, like, in regards to your statements of making sure you constantly research, what are some credible news sites that you guys suggest?
Great. So the most credible news source I can recommend to you is the Pew Research Center. It's where a lot of us got our data for the presentation today. There are other sources, like I said during the presentation, you should be aware of their biases. So for example, there's CNN, ABC, NBC, and those tend to have a little more left-leaning attitudes, and there's also Fox News for a little more right-leaning attitudes. But if you want to see the whole list, you can go to the Harvard Library website and search up their media bias chart, and it should be one of the first links you see, and you can find the whole spectrum of major news sources, their biases, and their trust levels.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. When I was first presenting, I had a list like you had just asked. Pew Research Center is great. The Guardian, Associated Press, Reuters, NPR, CBS News, and NBC News. They're all pretty neutral, and that's important so that there's no implicit bias within the articles.
Even if you wanted to get your information from maybe like a non-news source, a lot of colleges tend to have some sort of information or library out there. Like Hofstra on the portal has its own library where you can find documentation and whatnot. And even if you're like, okay, well, I don't trust any news, like directly news source, I want direct information or direct facts, look up nonpartisan like organizations who are also, they don't take money. Right? So if they're like nonpartisan and they don't take money besides like maybe donations to the cause, like sometimes there's environmental protection agencies that have lots of great nonpartisan information. You just have to look for them sometimes. I don't have any ones off the top of my head, but even doing like a simple search in a database or whatnot for a nonpartisan like agency or group that also doesn't take like direct funding from a partisan resource can be really helpful.
And this comment is not gratuitous because I'm not in the School of Communication. But if you're interested in this topic, media literacy is a course that is offered each semester in media studies. So give it some consideration. You'll learn ways to vet and make determinations about the veracity of claims in various forms of media. So, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I think this question was kind of already answered, but do you believe that voting third party is a waste of a vote, or do you believe that a throwaway vote is just not a real thing?
Can I answer this? Cool. I think that voting for a third party is absolutely a good idea if they align with your values, because you might not see the immediate impact of it, but it absolutely matters. So a lot of times in like United States history, you'll see examples of third parties springing up and having some support. And the main parties, so whoever at the time, but right now, Republicans and Democrats, will look at that party and say, these are a lot of voters that we could get. Let's see if we could cater to their needs. And then their needs are met. So voting for a third party a lot of times effectively says, I care about this issue. I want you politicians to pay attention to this, and then they do. So yeah, absolutely.
Third-party votes also can be incredibly important in like state elections. So not even just on like a national level. Sometimes these state elections can get local politicians and whatnot into places. Like I remember there was a few third-party people who got into my school board and they made like a fantastic change for just my district in general, right? So even at like a small local level, third parties can be great. I think the idea of a throwaway vote is really like detrimental because, in my opinion, a vote is a vote. A vote means that my voice goes here, and that's a number somewhere, right? Because even in like what he was saying is that even if you vote for a third party, and a significant amount of people might vote for that third party, and even if they don't win, the Democratic or the Republican Party might try to either put politician that you like into their party, or they'll try and pull those issues into the party, the way that he was talking about. But third parties themselves are incredibly important because it's what gets people to pay attention to alternate sources. Because if you don't do any sort of third party activity ever, those two parties just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Because then the idea of independence completely disappears, right? Because the idea that you can't rely without a Democratic or Republican Party is very detrimental. Because then you'll never have that kind of idea that you can have that radical change to have more than just those two parties. So I think that there is no throwaway vote. And if you have something to say, if you have a voice, you have a politician that you really like, go for it.
Yeah, and to just add on to that, like Jackie said, Rome wasn't built in a day. So if we really want to see a change in terms of there being less polarization and for there to be more political parties, voting for independence will give them more traction over time. And hopefully somewhere in the near future, we'll be able to see independent candidates and the independent party as a whole become one of the major parties so that people don't necessarily feel like they have to make a choice of the better of two evils.
Okay. Well, I'm going to wrap up here. Gianna, Connor, Emerald, James, and Jacqueline, thank you very much. It's not easy to get up and share your point of view under the lights on a dais with a microphone, but you did it. And I hope you heard something that made you think differently about the election. And regardless of who you vote for, please go and vote for who you believe in. So thank you for coming. And there's an event just after this one on diversity, equity, and inclusion in businesses and universities. So please stay tuned and stay here if you have an opening in your schedule.